delight for me to be here and to be with many new friends and with some people, some friends that I know and love very dearly. So thank you for welcoming me so sincerely. So we'll have an opportunity to explore the Clearness Committee, Clearness, from the lens or the perspective of the Center for Courage and Renewal. Can my friend in the corner here?
She's not here right now.
She is now.
Here she is. She just came in.
All right. Can everybody else hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so knowing that this is a very brief session, maybe we could just jump right in. So the agenda for this 45-minute session. I'll begin with a brief background and overview of the Clearness Committee, super short. Again, this is, I'm sure, very familiar to most of us here, but for some of us it may be brand new. And yes, please feel free to eat and enjoy the food that's here. So don't feel that you have to stay seated in these chairs. Make yourself comfortable. I'll talk a tiny bit about my experience with the Clearness Committee and the Manner of Friends, and the Clearness Committee from the perspective of the Center for Courage and Renewal. But the bulk of our time will be spent on actually practicing the Clearness Committee in this way. So I'd like to invite us to turn to a poem as a way to begin. And you have it on your chairs. I think everyone should have the poem that's entitled Beyond Questions. So on one side is the poem. On the other side of the sheet is the structure for the Clearness Committee that we will use during this session. Does everyone have the poem? Okay, so I'd like to begin by reading it, and then I'd like to invite just one other person in your own voice to read this poem. Beyond questions. The phoebe sits on her nest hour after hour, day after day, waiting for life to burst out from under her warmth. Can I weave a nest of silence? Weave it of listening, layer upon layer? But one must first become small. Nothing but a presence, attentive as a nesting bird, proffering no slightest wish toward anything that might happen or be given. Only the warm, faithful waiting contained in one's smallness. Beyond the question, the silence. Beyond the answer, the silence. Lisa. Another voice.
Beyond questions, the phoebe sits on her nest, hour after hour, day after day, waiting for life to burst out from under her warmth. Can I weave a nest for silence, weave it of listening, layer upon layer? But one must first become small, nothing but a presence, attentive as a nesting bird, proffering no slightest wish toward anything that might happen or be given. Only the warm, faithful waiting contained in one's smallness. Beyond the question, the silence. Before the answer, silence may start.
Thank you. I love that poem because it points to the very essence of what it means to be within the Clearness Committee. So our overview of the Clearness Committee. As you know, it is a process of both individual and communal discernment. And I love what Patricia Loring says about spiritual discernment in her magnificent Pendle Hill pamphlet entitled Spiritual Discernment, and it is one of the references you'll see on your sheet. She says, spiritual discernment is a gift from God, not personal achievement. It's not a matter of analysis or training. The Clearness Committee is an instrument by which we come toward understanding God's love and God's movement, Spirit's movement, God consciousness in our lives. So the Clearness Committee is traditionally used, as you know, in cases of marriage and often in cases of membership, to assess membership, readiness, preparation for marriage. At least that's the historical root of it. Even today, the Clearness Committee remains flexible. It is an uncodified instrument. Very few rules and regulations about the Clearness Committee. And even among friends, the Clearness Committee is used sparingly. So my experience of the Clearness Committee. In preparation for marriage 11 years ago, I had the experience of going through the Clearness Committee with the members of my meeting. And it was a useful process. It was helpful. And then in 2007 and 2008, as I was training with Parker Palmer, who is a Quaker writer and activist, I studied with him for 2 years to learn the process of the Clearness Committee. And it was really with Parker that the power and the presence of the Clearness Committee was really made known to me. And so I want to share that process with you. So Parker Palmer was the Dean of Studies at Pendle Hill for 11 years. And after leaving Pendle Hill, he founded the Center for Courage and Renewal. And the work of the Center for Courage and Renewal is to help people align their values with the work that we do in the world. So, some highlights about the Clearness Committee from the perspective of the Center for Courage and Renewal. Again, this may be something that you already know. So the key principle here is that every person has an inner teacher, an inner source of wisdom. Double confidentiality is critical to create a safe space, a safe environment. And by that I mean that everything that gets said in the Clearness Committee is strictly confidential. And as members of the committee, you are not to ever speak about what has happened in the Clearness Committee with the person who is the focus person, the person who may be presenting the concern, unless the focus person then approaches you and engages you in conversation. Then the confidentiality is being waived by the focus person. So the committee is strictly confidential. During the process of the Clearness Committee, you're invited as members of the committee, and we'll break out into groups of 4 with one focus person who will be the focus of our attention, and 3 other members of the committee. The members of the committee, your job is to listen as actively and deeply as we've already done, and to ask open questions. Open questions. So these are questions that do not advise, do not fix, do not save, do not preach, do not lead. And while this may sound simple, it's quite a high order skill. So the basic premise is that we are whole, resourceful, and creative. We ain't broke, and therefore we don't need to be fixed. And so the only questions that are permitted are those that are open. So an example of an open question would be, what did you learn from this experience? How did this touch you? What was your expectation? Wide open question. Can go, the focus person can go anywhere with that. An example of what would be a leading question or a closed-ended question would be, have you considered therapy? So we won't go there. We'll do our best. Right? So subtly, or not so subtly, giving advice. The Clearness Committee in this manner is profoundly countercultural. Profoundly countercultural, in that we are invited to listen and not to interrupt when the focus person is speaking, and to ask only these open questions, not giving advice. And finally, to allow silence and deep listening to be a part of the circle, a part of the group. When we offer these Clearness Committees in the Center for Courage and Renewal, we invite people, the groups, to have one empty chair in your group. That empty chair symbolizes the place and the role of silence. Allow silence, pausing, to do the heavy lifting. So that's a very brief overview of the Clearness Committee. So just as a word of caution, in using the Clearness Committee with groups, and the Clearness Committee in this manner is the centerpiece of all the work that I do. We spend one day preparing a group to enter the Clearness Committee process. And then there are a minimum of 2 hours of instruction. So we're getting a bum's rush here. But we're up for it. So if you turn over the page from the poem, you'll see the structure of what we will do. And Thomas has been very generous in working up another sheet that I believe is lavender in your packet. We won't be using that sheet. We will be using the structure that's on the opposite side of the poem. So does everyone have that? Yes? So I'd like you to get into groups of 4. And in your group, to select 2 people. One person will be the focus person, and that person again is the focus of our listening. The focus person is invited to present a dilemma, a concern, that you might have been struggling with, something that's been on your mind. The members of the committee there'll be 3 members of the committee, and your role is to ask open questions. So the focus person presents their dilemma, their concern for 5 minutes. At the end of the 5 minutes, that is when the timekeeper will say the 5 minutes has expired, and now we're moving into the time for open questions. And the committee will then ask these questions of the focus person for 15 minutes. At the end of 15 minutes, the timekeeper will say, 15 minutes has expired, and now we can turn to mirroring. So during the question and answer period, you as members of the committee will be taking notes, just as you did in this prior exercise. So you will note the question that was asked to the focus person and the response of the focus person. The question, the response. So it asks the members of the committee not to editorialize on the notes, not to project on the notes, not to say something like, when asked this question about should you take the job in Chicago or should you take the job in New York, you appear to be depressed. That's a projection. So just simply note, when asked the question about whether you should take the job in Chicago or New York, I noticed that you crossed your legs and bowed your head. That is a direct observation. So you see the difference between the two. So question, response, as best you can. This is not a court record. It does not need to be verbatim. You just get the gist of it as best as you can. At the end of the 15 minutes of questions, writing a response, the focus person was answering. There are 10 minutes remaining in the Clearness Committee. For the first 5 minutes of that 10-minute time period is a time period when, at the focus person's discretion, there can be either more questions or mirroring. So the timekeeper at the last 10 minutes will say to the focus person, we've got 10 minutes remaining in the Clearness Committee. 5 of those 10 minutes are open for either more questions to you or mirroring. The focus person can choose which he or she would like. If there are more questions, you keep going with more questions. If mirroring is requested, then you go back to your notes and you read from the notes. The question, the response. The question, response. And then the last 5 minutes of the Clearness Committee, probably the most challenging for the focus person. This is to affirm and to celebrate, just what we did before. So you are to speak an affirmation, to celebrate this person's life. You've heard a tiny bit of their story. So an example of an affirmation or celebration is something like, I so admire your courage. You have such a generous heart. What kindness to your mother. That is an example of how to affirm another person. An example of what not to do, which happens regularly in this process, is, I was struggling with this myself. I was really having a hard time, and I'm so glad you helped me. As wonderful as you are, please don't go there. To affirm and to celebrate. The focus is on the focus person. So if a question is directed to the focus person, he or she has many choices, many options. The focus person can say, I don't wish to answer that question. That's totally fine. The focus person can say, could you reframe that question? The focus person can say, put that question in the parking lot, somebody, so that we can come back to it a little bit later. There's only 5 minutes, so there's not much time. But in the full process, the focus person it's a 2.5-hour process, so there's much more. So pacing is very important, not editorializing, not leaning into the focus person's space, so not going in physically into the focus person's space, but to stay in one's own body. This is a practice of interiority, to stay connected within one's own body. So there's a lot more I can offer, but time is short. And I'd like to invite questions about the process.
Can I offer a story?
If the story is very short, and I only say that because time is short.
Yes.
Okay. I think I've had more Clearness Committees than anybody else on this earth. In 1993, I'd been attending Quaker Meeting in Berea, Kentucky for 2 years, and Parker Palmer came to be at the Berea College as a visiting professor and came to Berea Meeting. And Berea Meeting took up this Clearness Committee thing with full heart. We had Clearness Committees about everything, and it was amazing what happened to the meeting. I mean, everybody got to know everybody intimately. It was amazing. And I personally had one to determine if I should come to Pendle Hill in 1994. It was scattered. And I did come to Pendle Hill. And that Clearness Committee stayed with me through the writing of my book. It became a support committee, stayed with me for 12 years. Literally till 2 of the members had died. It was a death till death do us part commitment on their part that was just unbelievable. In April of 1998, they from Berea came to Pendle Hill where I had a support committee for the writing, and they met together. And in that process, I really learned about the mothering of God. It was just the most incredible experience of my life. It just was nurturing like I had never experienced in my life. So, I just want to say that I am a fan of Clearness Committees and support committees, big time. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Thanks. Other questions? Questions, insights, observations, questions about the process? Yes.
As you went through this, I found myself experiencing a lot of anxiety about remembering how to do it all.
Thank you for that. So again, this is a taste of the process, and it is a high bar. So anxiety is right ordered. So I think it's a balance of being aware and mindful and paying attention without being paralyzed. Okay? So there's a difference. We want to take this seriously, but we don't want to be paralyzed. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Is there advice, perhaps I missed it, about how to select the person who will be the focus of the Clearness Committee?
Traditionally, this is a very extensive process that the focus person will undergo with separate meeting for the focus person as well as a written application that, that I as a facilitator would read. Obviously, we're not doing that. And so I would trust that among friends, that a person who is holding a concern, not something trivial, nor something that is traumatic, but something that is real, that such a person will step forward knowing that the process is completely confidential and in fact has double confidentiality. So maybe just a few more questions, please.
This is a follow-up to that. I'm just realizing I'm in a place where I don't need to be the focus person. I wonder would it be helpful if those who do need to to be a focus, people might make us aware of that so that we might gather around people who would like the attention, or do you just want this to be random?
I do.
Random, okay.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'm wondering how much our questions might be asking people to look at what God or what Spirit is doing, or?
Yes. So within the Center for Courage and Renewal, the language of God or not God is not the focus. If the focus person uses God language, then we are encouraged to use that language because that is accessible, it's relevant to the person. If the person is not using God language, then perhaps we won't go there. I don't know what another person is carrying or not carrying. So we want the language to be as invitational as possible. For some people, God language is quite loaded. For other people, it is quite open and accessible. And the point of the process is to be open to all people wherever they are at. Does that help? Question?
In the regular Clearness Committee, you indicate like 2 hours for the process.
Correct.
Wouldn't it, as Quakers, we kind of work by consensus and work in a committee? Let's suppose that one clearness person, the activity, or the situation was summarized in an hour, and instead of going to the second hour, can the committee say, together as a consensus, we've hit enough subjects, and we don't need the extra hour? Is that?
I'm so glad you raised that point, because this has been a topic that has been extensively discussed with Parker and with the members of the facilitators within the Center for Courage and Renewal. And the question has often arisen in a 2.5-hour or 2-hour Clearness Committee. Well, it looks like the person has solved the problem, we can move on. Or we've come to an agreement, we've come to a consensus, let's be done with it. And what invariably happens, time after time, it's often in the last 5 minutes of the Clearness Committee, when the person has presented an issue, but out here is really the issue. So the person has presented the issue that, shall I take the job in Chicago or shall I take the job in New York? But the indecision, the capacity to decide, is present because of unresolved grief that the person is unaware of, that is back here. That doesn't arise until the last, perhaps, 5 minutes of the Clearness Committee. Now that's just a hypothetical, but it takes a sort of a weaving of a tapestry. And if we break that and say, well, we're done, and who decides that we're done? And so the invitation is to allow the process to be a process, which involves faith and trust. Yes.
How do you choose the members of the Clearness Committee?
As a facilitator, that is part of the skill, is creating the committee. In this case, we're simply going to allow it to be random.
So the facilitator chooses it, not the focus person, in a normal Clearness Committee?
The focus person indicates people that they would like on their committee, and I, as a facilitator, will do my best to put those people on that person's committee. And there are some schools of thought that say it's advisable to have only people that the focus person wants, but we know that in normal life, sometimes we don't get that. And so what is the benefit of having somebody that the focus person perceives to be problematic? We don't know. That's part of the mystery. Does that help?
Yeah.
Other questions? All right. So what I would propose proposed is that we divide into groups of 4. When you get into your group, you need to select one timekeeper and one focus person. I would encourage you to make a nest. So tuck yourself away in a corner of this room where you can have a private, confidential conversation, minding the tone and the loudness, the volume of your voice. If there is a group that does not have a focus person, someone willing to step forward, you can simply raise your hand. We'll go to Plan B. Does that sound like a reasonable option? Okay. So once you divide into your groups, please raise your hand, and then I know you're ready to start, and we'll all start at the same time. When we're done with the Clearness Committee, which will end at 11:50, not much time, okay, so let's do it at 30 minutes. We'll go a little bit into lunch. And then we'll gather back here at 30 minutes to very briefly debrief the process of the Clearness Committee. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. Off you go.